So good morning, everyone. First of all, happy Janmashtami. And I can see that in spite of Janmashtami, means like North India and whole of West, South, every part of India, we celebrate Janmashtami. And in North India, there is a holiday today. And in spite of that, at 6:30 already 40 people have joined. This shows that how important these lectures are. So in the series, next lecture will be by a bright young palliative care physician from Tata Memorial Hospital, Dr. Rucha Patil, and she finished her palliative medicine. After finishing her palliative medicine, she did pain fellowship at Kokila Ben Ambani Hospital, which is also very important that a palliative care physician should know interventional pain as well, because it's really required, and she did that. She is also the awardee of IDEA Palliative Care 2020 by ESCO. Excellent, congratulations for Rucha. I was reading her CV. I was very impressed that like other consultants, who have already started visiting various hospitals for providing supportive care and pain management. So wonderful, Rucha, that you are also already visiting 4 hospitals. All must be corporate hospitals. They must be needing supportive and palliative care physician, and she is doing already. These hospitals are in Vasai, various corporate hospitals. Thank you very much. Pokart, Phoenix, Yogam, or Cardinal, Graces Hospital, Vasai West, Mira Road. Means like Borivali, Mira Road, Vasai West, at least there is one person who is talking about palliative medicine, who is talking about supportive care, and who is talking about pain management. I am really happy to see this. Congratulations, Rucha. And please start your lecture. And very important lecture today, how to handle venous emergencies in cancer patients, venous thrombosis and etc. So Rucha will tell you how to handle these emergencies. Thank you, Rucha. Go ahead. Archana, you can start slides.
Dr. Rucha, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, ma'am. I just wanted to request Miss Archana if I could stop getting the notification to admit people in the room.
Ma'am, that when you're a host, it'll come. You can ignore. We will take care of that.
Yeah,
you can just present. Thank you.
Okay, I'm screen sharing from my side. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. So, because this is a very vast topic, even though I don't want to, I will have to rush through some slides. So as we all know that it is a very important risk. VT is a very important and common risk factor for poor prognosis in cancer patients. And of all the VT patients, 20% occur in cancer patients. Cancer itself increases the risk of VT by 4 to 6-fold. This is the regional incidence of VT in patients with cancer. Most of these countries in Asia, they mean to say countries like India, China. So this is a combined number of Asian patients, which also shows similar numbers, in fact, a bit higher. The most common sites of cancer in VT are, there are 3 groups in this: high risk, intermediate, and low risk. In the high risk category, pancreatic, brain, and stomach are even more dangerous compared to ovarian, gynec, and hematological malignancies. These 3 have even higher risk. Intermediate risk are cancers of the colon and lung, and breast and prostate have still lower risk of having VT. They have set some proposed primary mechanism for VT in specific tumor types, like like in lung and colorectal, it's because of the leukocytosis. Ovarian is because of the thrombocytosis induced. Pancreatic cancers is cytokines induced, and the cytokines are a little different in the brain tumors, whether it's primary or metastatic. So let's look at a small case that you could see in your daily practice. A 70-year-old man receiving palliative chemotherapy for metastatic colon carcinoma is admitted to the acute medical unit, that is the ER, complaining of acute dyspnea and pleuritic kind of chest pain. Now, when you evaluate, he undergoes a CT pulmonary angio and you confirm that there is a pulmonary embolism. Usually, pulmonary embolism and DVT are the most common venous thromboembolism in cancer patients. So the questions that would come to our mind are, why did it occur? What is the influence on patient's prognosis? What is the optimal management? And could this have been managed differently if it was just an incidental finding? So we all have heard about Professor Trossio, and the sad part is that he first described this finding, and later he was found with the same sign himself and was diagnosed with gastric cancer and died soon thereafter. We all also know about the Virchow triad in cancer patients. Basically, Virchow triad contains of endothelial injury, vascular stasis, and activating of the clot, which is hemodynamic changes. Now, factors that contribute to this in cancer patients are stasis is caused because of prolonged bed rest, surgical procedures, extrinsic compression of the blood, and that is because of the tumor itself, and increased blood viscosity. Then endothelial injury is also because of direct invasion of the tumor, prolonged use of the central catheter, endothelial damage because of chemotherapy itself, and the tumor cytokines also cause endothelial damage. And a clot activation. This mechanism is provided because of the more procoagulant factors which exist in cancer patients due to hypoxia and inflammation, tissue factors, proangiogenic factors, and overall increase in platelet activity, decrease in anticoagulant activity, and decreased fibrinolytic activity. This slide summarizes patient-related risk factors, treatment-related, some hematological markers, and like we said, site-specific markers. The vice versa is also true, that occult cancer in unprovoked VTE. Now, unprovoked VTE can be the earliest sign of cancer, and up to 10% patients will be diagnosed with cancer within a year after having an unprovoked VTE. More than 60% of occult cancers are diagnosed very soon after diagnosis of an unprovoked VTE. These are few recommendations for occult VTE from so it says that patients with unprovoked VTE should undergo limited cancer screening, whereas age-specific and gender-specific cancer screening like colon, breast, cervix, and prostate should be done as per the national recommendations. In patients who have recurrent unprovoked VTE, they can have a lower threshold for cancer detection, which means they will need higher screening. And in patients with provoked VTE, a routine cancer screening is not recommended. There are few risk assessment tools which I have mentioned. I'll just quickly go through them because we need to focus on the later slides. There is something called Khorana score, which predicts the chemotherapy associated VTE using baseline clinical and lab values. Then if you add a D-dimer and P-selectin to the Khorana score, there is something called a AY score, which is the follow for these is around every 2 years. Then there is a predictive model for chemotherapy associated VTE. This gives us an estimate of how much risk is more with particular types of chemotherapy, hemoglobin, and BMI, and also with the site of the cancer. Now let's have a look at the pathophysiology in cancer. The cancer itself is a prothrombotic state, as we all know, and it involves production of procoagulants by tumor cells, suppression of fibrinolytic activity, and platelet activation. There is also a close link between malignant transformation, tumor angiogenesis, metastasis, and thrombosis. So as we can see, they create a procoagulant activity in their own microenvironment. And there are multiple various factors which influence this procoagulant activity to cause a venous thrombus. Now, if for example, if we look at cancer-specific, type-specific biomarkers, if you consider lung cancer, it is neutrophilia which increases the risk of thrombosis. Then if we look at ovarian tumors or other gynecological malignancies, it is actually the thrombocytosis which increases the chances of a VTE. In pancreatic tumors and other GI tumors, it is a tumor-derived tissue factor which triggers thrombosis in the pancreatic cancers. And this is a slide for the brain tumors, where the tumor-derived PDPN triggers thrombosis. The references for each are mentioned in the slide. And there are some more pointers on pathophysiology, like plasminogen activating inhibitor 1, which is a potent inhibitor of fibrinolytic system. Then there is a pro-inflammatory cytokine markers, cytokines such as tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 1 and 6, and interferons, which we have studied, which activate coagulation. Then the P-selectin leads to platelet aggregation and thrombus formation. More importantly, it is chemotherapy which induces endothelial cell activation, leading to increased tissue factor expression and more elevated levels of VVF and factor 8 and decreased levels of the antithrombin factors. Like we said, cancer-mediated hypercoagulability occurs as a result of direct activation of the procoagulant pathways, as well as some indirect systemic effects of cancer on the cell types, including endothelial cells and platelets. And various malignancies, the neutrophils themselves are primed in a certain way so that they release contents in the form of some NETs and resulting in direct activation. And it is neutrophil extracellular traps, which are particular types of extracellular DNA fibers, and they result in direct activation of a procoagulant pathway. And as a consequence of all this above chemical locha, there is direct and indirect mechanisms. Patients with cancer can have an elevated risk of VT. So what would be the optimal management of this patient? Management would also include diagnosis, management of the current situation, as well as some prophylactic measures to avoid recurrent VT. So what we want to do is we want to prevent acute and chronic complications, fatal PE, thrombus extension and embolization. And obviously anticoagulants is the cornerstone for this. Now the challenge is to choose the anticoagulants, and most of us will have different opinions on this already, because the institutional practices are also different, and availability of anticoagulants is also different in different areas. And national guidelines are also, international guidelines are also quite confusing. So like I'm saying, there are varied evidences to support each of the anticoagulants available. The most renowned is the CLOT trial and the CATCH trials for VT in patients with cancer. Now, in short, if we say the CLOT trial demonstrated that it studied basically dalteparin versus warfarin. And so dalteparin is a low molecular weight heparin, which is superior to warfarin in preventing recurrent VT in malignancy, whereas there is no significant decrease in risk of major bleeding with dalteparin. So in a nutshell, the CLOT trial says that even if we use dalteparin, the chances of bleeding are higher or not significantly lower at least. And CATCH study studies the incidence of VT recurrence. So if there is an article published in 2018 which reviews the CLOT and CATCH trials. What it says is all the major evidence-based consensus guidelines recommend low molecular weight heparin for initial and long-term treatment. And this recommendation is based on an observation that low molecular weight heparin is not only more effective, but it also offers overall stable anticoagulation in patients with poor oral intake, and it has lower drug interaction profile. Although DOACs are not currently recommended for VT in patients with cancer, there are various RCTs comparing rivaroxaban and endoxaban to LMWH, and the current ongoing trials will help us get some more clarity in this regard. This is some previous trials which have helped us gain some confidence in treating patients. And however, there are ongoing trials. So this is one latest article in ASCO, latest I think it's still 2014. But what it says is that in outpatient setting, routine pharmacological thromboprophylaxis is not recommended in cancer patients. So routine anticoagulants are not recommended. But based on some limited RCT data, clinicians may consider low molecular weight heparin prophylaxis on a case-to-case basis, based on highly selected outpatients, depending on where the malignancy is and what type of chemotherapy they are being administered. Then patients with multiple myeloma receiving thalidomide or lenalidomide-based regimens with a steroid should receive pharmacological thromboprophylaxis with either aspirin or a LMWH or something similar for high risk, for low risk, and only low molecular heparin for high risk patients. In the inpatient setting, JCO recommends that hospitalized patients who have active malignancy with acute medical illness or a reduced mobility should receive thromboprophylaxis in the absence of bleeding or other contraindications. And those who have malignancy without additional risk factors may be considered for thromboprophylaxis even in the absence of any bleeding. For surgical patients who are due for a surgery, all patients with malignant disease undergoing major surgical intervention should be considered for therapy, which is either unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin, unless contraindicated, and this is a very strong evidence. This prophylaxis should be commenced preoperatively, but for commencing preoperative, the evidence is moderate. Mechanical methods may be added to pharmacological prophylaxis, but it should not be used as a monotherapy. Only a combined regimen of pharmacological and mechanical prophylaxis is recommended, as it may improve the efficacy. And lastly, it recommends that the thromboprophylaxis should be continued for at least 7 to 10 days in all patients. After 7 to 10 days, up to 4 weeks, it should be considered for patients undergoing major surgeries, pelvic or abdominal surgeries, for cancers who have higher risks. Now, this was about the prophylaxis. Now we're talking about the treatment of VTE in cancer patients. Like we said in the beginning, one size doesn't fit all. It would be very case to case, and individualization would be based on factors like the clinical status, the performance status of the patient, the stage of the cancer, risk of VTE and bleeding, and also patient's preference, which means in practice, a lot of families and patients would rather say, we don't want to be aggressive, we just want her to be comfortable. So all these factors have to be taken in consideration. There will be cost factors, availability factors, which will help us decide the anticoagulant of choice in that particular case. So the initial treatment would be LMWH for sure. It is as effective for unfractionated heparin for initial therapy in cancer patients. And it says that LMWH was associated with reduced mortality at 3 months follow-up. That was a Cochrane database. And the long-term anticoagulant therapy does not include warfarin because it has a narrow therapeutic window, higher drug interaction profile. There has to be frequent monitoring of PTINR and delayed onset and clearance of action also if there happen to be some reactions. So what are the advantages of LMWH over warfarin in long-term treatment? That there are routine lab monitoring is not needed with LMWH. There is weight adjusted dosing, lack of interaction, and it can accommodate invasive procedures and thrombocytopenia. And of course, it is more effective than warfarin. So these are few guidelines for treatment of cancer-associated thrombosis, ASCO, NCC, and ACCP, and most of them will recommend LMWH more than UFH for initial treatment of 5 to 7 days, and LMWH for the next 3 to 6 months, which is called extended treatment. There are limitations of both. Now, LMWH, we know that it has parenteral administration, it affects the quality of life, it is weight adjusted dosing, cost, and a small risk of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Now, there is some and oral VK limitations, that it has narrow therapeutic index, frequent monitoring is required, and it is less effective. Now, a retrospective analysis of a US medical database showed that patients with cancer-associated thrombosis were treated who were treated with anticoagulants as outpatients. 50% received warfarin, and 28% from this 50 switched to another anticoagulant within next 98 days of initiation. And 40% did not receive LMWH in accordance with the guidelines and recommendation. And out of them also 44% switched to another anticoagulant within the next 23 days. So this shows compliance with both the agents. And there are some newer anticoagulants which have better predictable pharmacokinetics. They have a fixed dosing. They have very few important drug interactions, and there is a minimal need for repeated lab testing. Now, what are the limitations of these agents, DOACs, for treatment of cancer-associated thrombosis? Very few patients have been included in clinical trials as yet. There is no head-to-head comparison against low molecular weight heparin in the long term. And there are liver and renal dysfunction that occur commonly in cancer patients, and those need to be adjusted accordingly. And there is reduced absorption from GI tract, interactions with anti-cancer therapy itself. So, like I said, there has to be some head-to-head data with comparison of DOACs and LMWH in cancer patients. So what does the latest review article from our available evidence say? So it says that for treatment of, these are only bites from the actual article. The link has been mentioned. So what are the bites that I've mentioned is for different sets of patients. For initial treatment of established cancer-associated VT within the first 6 months, what are the recommendations? So for the first 5 to 10 days, which is called early maintenance or long-term maintenance, sorry, for the first 5 to 10 days, they recommend LMWH, which is possibly superior to a dose-adjusted UFH. And treatment, treatment has to be continued for the next up to 6 months at least. After 6 months, the choice of anticoagulant depends case to case. Where LMWH probably resulted in an important reduction in VT, DOACs may likely reduce the VT compared to LMWH, but they can increase the risk of major bleeding. And then they have compared different therapeutic anticoagulant agents. So when they compared DOACs to LMWH, they compared apixaban. It was more efficacious than LMWH enoxaparin, followed by warfarin with less bleed. DOACs versus warfarin itself. So when they compared edoxaban versus warfarin for the treatment of patients, DOACs was more effective and it was associated with less bleeding risk. Comparing LMWH with warfarin, obviously therapeutic efficacy was similar between both. This is for after 6 months. This is a comparison of recommendations of both major guidelines, that is ASCO and ITAC, and for different sites, that is intracranial malignancy, thrombocytopenia, renal impairment, obesity, and pregnancy. What guidelines have they mentioned? So ASCO says that for intracranial malignancy, DOACs or LMWH should be offered to patients with an established VT and with a primary or metastatic CNS malignancy. ITAC says almost the same thing. For renal impairment, for moderate to severe renal impairment, LMWH adjusted to an anti-factor 10A level or UFH is recommended, followed by warfarin. Whereas ITAC says that if creatinine clearance is less than 30, then unfractionated heparin followed by warfarin or LMWH. So this is an external and with mechanical prophylaxis also, like an external compression device. This is a good flow chart to summarize the current recommendations. So what it says is that if there is established cancer-associated VT and there are no contraindications to anticoagulant, then we have certain choice. If there are absolute contraindications to anticoagulation, then we have to think of a IVC filter placement. Then if there are no contraindications, then the options that we have are to treat with LMWH or DOAX or warfarin for at least 6 months. Then or thrombolysis on a case-to-case basis, like we had seen. In both these scenarios, if there is indefinite anticoagulation beyond, there is indefinite anticoagulation beyond 6 months, and that has to be decided again on case-to-case basis with intermittent assessment, timely assessment. For recurrence, we will have to switch to another anticoagulant like we do for pain, or increase the low molecular weight heparin dose. And if there is, we could also do secondary thromboprophylaxis, or just wait and watch, just observe if there is no recurrence. So this is in a nutshell. So key takeaway messages after all of these confusing evidences are that LMWH remains the preferred therapeutic option, at least in the initial 6 months. And duration of treatment depends on the status of the patient, other risk factors, any contraindications, and patient's choices. DOAC should be investigated more carefully before we offer them to our cancer patients. What are the other things that would influence patients' prognosis? So there are some studies to tell us about the CCI, which we say scores, and it says that VT or cancer-associated thrombosis is the second leading cause of death in cancer patients, and it accounts for a total of 9 to 10% of deaths. It is associated with early mortality, especially during chemotherapy, and VT increases the risk of mortality in cancer patients by 4 to 7 times. It's not 47, I think it's 4 to 7 times. So those who develop, cancer patients who develop VT at diagnosis or within a year tend to have a significantly worse prognosis. A diagnosis of VT is a serious complication of cancer that can adversely affect the person's quality of life and overall survival. And it is estimated that approximately 4 to 20% of cancer patients, which is a large proportion, will experience VT at some or the other stage. And it is the highest during the initial stages of the natural history of the disease. So thank you very much for this opportunity once again. And in October, soon after we have the WHPCD, 13th October is World Thrombosis Day.
Thank you, Rucha. It was a very wonderful overview. Arun, are there any questions? Arun, good morning.
Good morning, good morning. But one question is, Rucha, how do you tackle the cost factor in Indian settings? DOACs and low molecular weight heparin are very expensive, we know. So the question is from, how do we consider the cost? Because many patients won't be able to afford DOACs or LMWH. How do we go about it from your practical experience? Thank you.
As you are aware already, for patients who are not affording ANA from Tata, what we have been doing is I am asking the patients to get the heparin from TMH when I'm continuing supportive care at my other centers. But I understand this problem is critical, and sometimes even I run out of options, then where we have to go to things like warfarin with all the risks explained to the patient.
Arun,
Okay.
would you like to share your experiences on this topic?
For warfarin and DOACs, ma'am.
Like overall. overall?
Yeah, DOACs and LMWH is preferred in cancer because the trials have said LMWH, but DOACs are coming up in big way because DOACs are easy to take. There is much more patient compliance and expertise is not needed to give subcutaneous injection. Just a pill. Take the pill and you're. I mean, you don't have to take the injection. You don't need a nurse or doctor to come and give the injection. But the problem with DOACs is that there are not much clinical trial. That's why we don't know whether how good DOACs works in cancer. As and when the clinical trials come in, I'm sure that people will probably get more towards DOACs because as far as anticoagulation property is concerned, DOACs in non-cancer, particularly in cardiology and other conditions, DOACs are used quite regularly
Yes.
rather than using low LMWH in chronic cases. So DOACs are good. We have to wait for the trials to come in. I'm sure then people will go more towards DOACs. For warfarin, the thing is that warfarin is cheap, but it's very difficult to maintain the INR range in warfarin. It fluctuates a lot, so we have to take good care of the patient, rather take a good follow-up of the patient. If we give warfarin, warfarin is very cheap. Another thing that people use is acetrom. Acid is coumarin that can also be used with warfarin. I mean, in place of warfarin, that can also be used. It's also very cheap, can be used. So these are my experiences. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arun. There is a question from Dr. Meenakshi, Arun, that what is the role? First of all, there are many good comments, Rucha. Dr. Meenakshi wants to ask the role of continuing anticoagulation in hospice when patient has DVT and swollen limb. So it's a very genuine question. Rucha?
Yes,
Would you
ma'am.
like- Yeah, go ahead.
Wonderful. We would still have to give it because it does come under the umbrella of supportive care. We are not giving any aggressive management if we are able to help the patient symptomatically. I think it is rational to continue anticoagulants in a hospice setting as well.
Absolutely, I think Rucha has correctly answered because this is absolutely necessary that patient is having DVT and swollen limb. The only thing which can subside their swollen limb is the low molecular weight heparin, and we need to continue because it comes under umbrella of supportive care. Absolutely. Anybody who is working in hospice would like to share their experience regarding this? Someone from Karunashri is here? Seema or someone?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes,
Seema here.
Yes.
Yeah. I too agree with Rucha, but and as she mentioned before, it has to be an individualized care. If you know patient is imminently dying, probably that is the phase where you will probably withhold anticoagulation and any other unnecessary medications. But when we look at end of life care and probably we are expecting a little extended lifespan, patient is not in the imminently dying phase, then probably we will continue because it is a main component of providing comfort and care to the patient. So I think we would continue. When the patient goes into that imminently dying phase, probably that is the time we would stop. Thank you.
Absolutely, Seema. This is also hard. This is also very, very true that if imminently dying and it's a matter of few hours or few days, I think it is not a good idea to continue. Thank you, Seema. Thank you very much. Arun, there is one more question by Dr. Rajni. Would you like to go ahead with the question answer again? Dr. Rajni wants to ask very important question. Yes, go ahead.
The question is, Rucha, question is for you. Once there is high clinical suspicion of deep vein thrombosis, can we start LMWH before confirming DVT by color Doppler? That is one question. We have another one question we'll take after this. First question.
I don't think it takes much time to do a color Doppler. So why should we not wait is one query that I'm getting. Because there could be other factors or risk factors also. There could be other risks associated. Patient could be on chemotherapy that would increase the chances of interaction. So I would prefer to first confirm the presence of a DVT by color Doppler, though clinically we can say by doing some clinical tests.
I think I also agree with Rucha that it is basically there are so many reasons of having swollen limbs, and it does not take a lot of time. But definitely, again, there are many places, Rucha, where there is no color Doppler possible. So I think
Yes,
again they will have to take their decision based to case basis.
yes.
Arun, next question, please. One more question is there.
Yeah, Rucha. So congratulations for your nice presentation. So the question is, Rucha, do cancer patients with venous thromboembolism, do they have any special or additional palliative care needs apart from starting LNW? Good question.
Definitely. Very nice question. And thank you for complimenting the lecture as well. Most of the cancer patients, whether they have VT or not, from the day of diagnosis, I think they have additional palliative care needs. They will have tremendous emotional needs, which also, like I always say, it also comes under our umbrella. Everything is our concern only. We have to take care of everything. So they will have clinical needs, of course, based case to case. And the existence of VT itself adds to a lot of burden, financial burden, emotional burden. It also adds to the caregiver burden. So definitely palliative care needs increase in these kind of cases.
Also pain management.
And pain management, right?
Pain.
Thank you for that.
We have to do good analgesics for thromboembolism as well.
Yes.
Question from Dr. Seema Rao. What are the drugs you would avoid in a patient with deep vein thrombosis, or which drugs would you be willing to use but with caution in a person who has deep vein thrombosis?
Drugs as in other from the anticoagulant, like if we consider pain medicines, then we would avoid things like NSAID or anything that would increase the risk of bleeding. If we're using drugs for other symptom management, we would have to choose each drug and check any interaction possible before we proceed. There could be simple antibiotics which we use left, right, and center, but it can have adverse reactions when we are giving them along with anticoagulants. So yeah, definitely, other than NSAIDs, there will be a lot of drugs that we would have to use with caution.
Okay, Rucha, thank you. Another interesting point that people have asked, Mukul Mishra, Dr. Mishra, is that we know that there is poor compliance with low molecular weight heparin. So can we start with low molecular heparin and then probably switch over to DOACs after a week and then continue with the DOACs? Is that possible? What do you think?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Actually, this is what we should be heading towards as a fraternity itself. If we could use DOACs for an extended period, like 3 to 6 months, definitely the compliance would be better. And for initial 5 to 7 days, all the guidelines are recommending LMWH. It's only for the later period that it is case to case and dependent on availability. And like you rightly said, just because we don't have enough evidence in cancer patients, we are little hesitant to use DOACs. But otherwise, if we are proceeding in that direction, DOACs would be the best thing to use in the near future.
Thank you, Rucha. There is one more question, Arun. Good, you finished in time, so there are a lot of questions and we can take all the questions properly. Arun, there is a question regarding post-surgery thromboprophylaxis. They want to, can we, yeah, go ahead, Arun.
So the question is from Rajni Sinha, post-surgery thromboprophylaxis. So she's asking, can we start with newer oral anticoagulants, and for how many days? I think we have to talk about medicine and non-medical things also in this.
Yeah. So post-surgery, we always think of doing combined thromboprophylaxis, mechanical as well as pharmacological agents. And for how many days? So I think immediate post-operative period for at least 7 to 10 days does warrant a good anticoagulant cover. After that, depending on how much improvement is there or stability with the clot, that would decide the further care, whether it should be more intense or it could be something only for maintenance.
I think, Rucha, for post-operative thromboprophylaxis, I think low molecular weight heparin is preferred because it is for short time and there is no need to monitor.
Monitor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and basically, besides low molecular weight heparin, mechanical thromboprophylaxis that is also very routine and it is useful. There is one again more very interesting question has come. What is the role of bedside USG in high-risk palliative care patients to identify DVT?
Role of bedside USG. If this is available, it is the best thing to happen. But I am facing serious problems getting the PCPNDT approval to use the machine for simple things like this also.
Yes. So this is again, this is by Dr. Neetu, again a palliative medicine physician, and because they are using it, and I think this is quite a useful USG bedside, and it's so simple to diagnose that there is a thrombus, and immediately you can diagnose, and there is no need to call radiologist also. I think I'm not saying that initially you don't call, but once you will start recognizing it is very simple to assess that there is a thrombus. So you can start immediately, and then proper opinion from radiologist you can take subsequently. So it is good, but as Rucha said, that PNDT is a big problem all over country, and I think Rucha, just keep on working hard. This problem will also get solved after some time.
Definitely.
There is one more question, Arun.
Yes. What non-pharmacological methods are recommended for venous thromboembolism? Which analgesic do you prefer in VT? People are asking analgesic. Rucha, just name the analgesics and non-pharmac, please.
Non-pharmacological methods, like we said, DVT stockings, and in the initial few phases, few days, we don't want to dislodge the thrombus. So we would definitely not recommend a lot of MLD or some kind of aggressive occupational therapy for the edema. That has to be contraindicated as a non-pharmacological measure, but definitely the stockings do help. And which analgesic would I prefer? Again, it is from the type of pain. What I would definitely avoid is an NSAID. But usually for these kind of patients, a mild opioid, a weak opioid should be a good choice. If it is a mild pain score, then something that is easily available like tapentadol or something should be a good choice. It has lesser interactions with anticoagulants also.
And what about paracetamol?
Yes, if the pain score is lower, then simple analgesics that we prefer like paracetamol, and if the pain score is higher, then an opioid.
Yes, great.
Very good, Rucha. I think this is absolutely a correct answer, that we will not like to use thrombopress or something because there are chances of venous thrombus and dislodgement, and this will cause more harm. But definitely stockings and all we can use as a non-pharmacological therapy. Anybody wants to have any comments or question, please raise your hands, open your mic. We have time. Anybody wants to comment or any questions? Even if you want to praise the Rucha, please open your mic and praise openly. No? Okay, Rucha, many people have already said in chat box that it was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Definitely, indeed, it was an excellent presentation. People are congratulating there. Yes, Rucha is a young palliative care physician speaking. Now whole country knows that who is Rucha. So it's so good to see all young people over here, and they are speaking with their experiences. They are speaking with the evidence, and this is what our aim was to improve the standards of our palliative care practice in routine day-to-day care. So thank you very much, and we will be there with the next good topic or important topic on next Monday at 6:30. Archana and Nisha, it's not Dr. Rora na next week. It is next to next week. Archana. Hello, Archana.
Yes, ma'am.
It is next week or next to next week?
20th September is Dr. Bruera,
Okay,
ma'am.
so don't forget to join on 20th September. Dr. Brora will come and tell you how to integrate, because he has a tremendous experience. What are the benefits, what are the barriers, what are the opportunities to integrate palliative care in continuum of care. So listening Dr. Brora is a fortune. So
Yes.
please don't miss that chance on 20th of September. And before 20th September, there are 2 more Mondays. Please join with important topics. Thank you very much again. Have a happy.
Ma'am, sorry, Dr.
Thank you
Sushma,
so
ma'am,
much,
I
madam.
just have a question. Sorry.
Yes,
This is
please.
Meenakshi.
Okay, go ahead. What do?
Ma'am, just wanted, the experts on the panel to say in the different DOACs like rivaroxaban, apixaban, or dabigatran. What is the institutional practices nowadays? Because in Cancer Institute now I'm seeing that more and more patients are on apixaban after the initial 5 to 10 days of low molecular weight heparins, and when they are going home, it seems to be cheaper and it seems to be working out for our patients. They seem to be continuing it for months together. So I just wanted to know what is happening at Tata and AIIMS.
Okay, Rucha, go ahead. Anuja, Arun, anybody wants to take this? And then we will take AIIMS practice also. Neetu, please be ready for the AIIMS practice.
Madam, in institutes where I am practicing, currently DOACs are not being used very commonly, especially the oncologists are not very happy if I suggest to them. So usually we are not using in the areas where I am practicing. But I'm sure TMH and AIIMS can be pioneers and we could always follow the lead.
So what is the practice in Arun and TMH?
Mostly people use low molecular heparin. DOACs are not generally practiced, but in selected cases, DOACs are given. But the standard practice is now.
Anuja has answered the same low molecular weight heparin. So what is the practice in AIIMS, Neetu? Then Dr. Stanley wants to ask something. Neetu, what is the practice at AIIMS?
Good morning, ma'am. Soon after DVT is diagnosed, in AIIMS, we are giving low molecular heparin itself. We are mostly giving dalteparin, 10,000 international units, at least for 3 to 6 months we are giving. And other than that, regarding tablet, we are giving rivaroxaban, 20 milligram. Initially, we are giving PD followed by OD. So this is also given at least for 3 to 6 months. It is a little costly, so affordability is an issue with rivaroxaban mostly. And but if the patients are staying close to AIIMS, or if they can get into Dharamshala or somewhere, then it is preferable for them to come to AIIMS daily in room number 15. That is our injection room. We are daily providing them with injection. Sisters are providing. If any doctor writes an OPD card, definitely they can daily come to the hospital and take their injection and go home. Otherwise, if they can afford injection at their own home, yes, that is definitely the best. Otherwise, rivaroxaban they are being given. Thank you.
Thank you, Neetu. Thank you very much. Dr. Stanley, you wanted to have comments?
Yeah, just to say that using the subcutaneous route and teaching the family is so easy, and it can, they can continue the low molecular weight heparin at home. So, till we get more studies about DOACs, we can continue with the low molecular weight subcut at home.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Very important comment. So thank you very much. Dr. Rajni wants to say that I am practicing at Mahavir Cancer Sansthan. I am giving, no, what is she giving? Dr. Rajni, can you open your mic and say?
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, ma'am. It was really a nice presentation. And I just want to tell that I'm a physician at Mahavir Cancer Sansthan, and I've been using this newer oral anticoagulants. So the first 5 to 7 days, I'm giving low molecular weight heparin, followed by oral anticoagulants, and I'm having good response, as well as the compliance, because patients go home, they take the oral drug. There is no need for monitoring for the renal functions, and good results is there. So I am giving the Apixaban or Dabigatran or Rivaroxaban.
Thank you, Dr. Rajni, for sharing. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Rucha.
you.
All the best for your practice in 4 places.
Thank you, ma'am.